that you should be able to define what is Arthur's reaction, serum sickness, immune complex disease, and you should be able to discuss the pathogenesis of type 3 and 4 hypersensitivity reactions. You should also know how to discuss various clinical presentations of these two types of reactions, discuss the treatment, prevention, and diagnostic immunology, which is related to these two types of hypersensitivity reactions. So the first, or rather the third type of antibody-dependent cellular cytotoxicity is a portion of the previous lecture because there was some problem in time limit. I wanted to tell you about, because we discussed in type 2 hypersensitivity cellular toxicity, cytotoxicity. It was a cytotoxic type of hypersensitivity in which the antigen was part of a cell, and antibodies come and attach to it and they activate the complement. So in this relation, I just wanted to tell you a few points about a cytotoxicity which is brought about by antibodies, and this is a function of the natural killer cells. In this type of antibody-dependent cellular cytotoxicity, cytotoxic cells are not involved. The antibodies stimulate the immune cells through their Fc receptors to bring a target cell destruction or lysis. So these Fc-Y receptors are found on phagocytes as well as natural killer cells, and these are responsible for the antibody-dependent cellular cytotoxicity. Otherwise, we saw that cytotoxic T cells were bringing about the damage of virus-infected cells or cancer cells, tumor cells. In this situation, a target cell, for example, virus-infected cell or transplant graft, is recognized as foreign, and the antibody is bound by its Fab portion to this antigen. And then it activates the surface receptors of natural killer cells because they also have these receptors on their surface. So the natural killer cell will be triggered to release cytotoxic mediators that act on the target cell through their perforins and proteases. Perforins means they cause holes in the cell, and proteases cause destruction of the proteins and they kill the target cell. So antibody-dependent cellular cytotoxicity is another function of the antibodies, and it is independent of cytotoxic T cells. This cytotoxicity is brought about by natural killer cells. Now coming to today's topic, type 3 hypersensitivity. This is very interesting aspect of hypersensitivity. In this, antigen-antibody complexes are deposited in certain organs, especially kidneys and blood vessels. And when these antigen-antibody complexes are deposited there, they are recognized by the complement proteins, they activate them, and the membrane attack complex or MAC causes damage to these antigen-antibody complexes. And during their damage, they cause damage to the organ in which these antigen-antibody complexes are deposited. Sometimes body's own organs also elicit antibodies, and we will see how this happens. So when they elicit immune response, the body's own or self organs, antibodies are produced against them, and these are known as autoantibodies because they are acting on the body's own tissue against the body's own cells. So they are formed and they get deposited, especially in the joints. They cause arthritis there, kidneys cause nephritis, and blood vessels, vasculitis. Arthritis, nephritis, and vasculitis are all terms used for inflammation of these organs. And the problem or disease which is caused by this is known as autoimmune disease. So you can see here that immune complexes are formed, and these immune complexes consist of antigens and antibodies made against them, and these immune complexes are deposited in the blood vessel walls. And the presence of these immune complexes activates the complement proteins. And activation of complement proteins, on one hand, cause formation of membrane attack complex, and on the other hand, it causes attraction of cells of inflammation, and so inflammation occurs at this point. So the enzymes released from the neutrophils, which are cells of inflammation, and also the membrane attack complex, they cause damage of this portion of the organ in which these immune complexes are deposited. So this complement activation and a recruitment of inflammatory cells causes injury to that particular organ where these antigen antibody complexes are deposited. And therefore, this type of hypersensitivity is known as immune complex type of hypersensitivity. So one type of this immune complex hypersensitivity is Arthur's reaction. When these antigen antibody complexes are deposited at some local site of the body and cause inflammation, this is known as Arthur's reaction. If the body is exposed repeatedly to an antigen, high levels of IgG and antigen occur, and they result in deposition of immune complexes in a very high number. These complexes get deposited in various parts of the body or at a local site. If same antigen is injected, intense edema and hemorrhage occurs that reaches a peak in 3 to 6 hours, and it causes vascular occlusion and necrosis. So let's see what happens here. Antigen antibody complexes are being formed, and they then get deposited. They activate the complement, and when they deposit on the blood vessels walls, the complement will activate. It will attract all the cells of the inflammation, especially leukocytes, and they will come there and they will damage the blood vessel, and a reduced blood supply will happen that will lead to tissue necrosis. What are the clinical manifestations of Arthur's reaction? There are certain very interesting terms that are related to certain conditions in the lungs. This is also known as allergic pneumonitis or allergic alveolitis. And this is mostly related to the profession or the exposure of a person to a certain antigen. And we use for them farmer's lung, cheese worker's lung, woodworker's lung, and wheat miller's lung. Why lung? Because the lungs are affected, causing pneumonitis and alveolitis. Why it happens is that if a person during like farming, they inhale certain small bacteria that grow in plants, or in cheese workers' lung, because you know that cheese is produced through an action of certain fungi. So those fungal antigens, or in woods, when a person works in wood, there are certain bacteria on the wood also, and in wheat miller's lungs, on the husk of the wheat, there are certain antigens. Even the husk can act as an antigen. So when these antigens are inhaled by that person, and that person is exposed to these antigens every day, these get deposited in the lungs, alveoli, and lung tissue. And then antibodies are produced against them. So they form a antigen antibody complex. And then that person experiences breathlessness, and allergic condition, which is called allergic pneumonitis. Even if the immunization of tetanus is given at the same site with a very short interval, this type of antigen antibody complexes can form and they can be deposited at the same site, and it will lead to an allergic reaction which is known as Arthus reaction. So please remember that Arthus reaction is a local deposition of in antigen antibody complexes. Now, serum sickness occurs when these complexes are deposited in various sites of the body, and there is a systemic response to these immune complexes. For example, if an injection of foreign serum is given, like certain drug or certain vaccine is formed in another animal serum, and this can lead to antigen antibody reaction. So these antibodies are produced against that antigen. And because these are in circulation, so the whole body systems will react to that, and this is known as serum sickness. In many aspects, this resembles anaphylaxis reaction also, but because it is not as immediate as anaphylaxis, so it is, and because its pathology, its pathogenesis is different from anaphylaxis or immediate hypersensitivity, it is placed in this separate class of hypersensitivity type 3. So the person can experience fever, urticaria, which means rashes on the skin, red hot skin, pain in the joints, arthralgia, lymph glands can enlarge, spleen can enlarge. Eosinophilia is very important finding in these allergic reactions. So it takes sometimes several days to develop. Drug-induced rash can occur, and especially in penicillin and ampicillin injections, or even when these are given orally, this drug-induced rash can occur. And this also may cause serum sickness in a person. And diphtheria antitoxin, which is made in horses, can also lead to this type of reaction. Now, these immune complexes, they deposit in various sites and they can cause various diseases. And this is very important clinical aspect for you to understand, like infective endocarditis, serum sickness, certain viral infections like hepatitis B and dengue fever. These immune complexes are there. Acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis is a disease that occurs after an infection by a bacterium streptococci occurs. These streptococci usually cause throat infections, but they also cause skin infections. So after the species that causes skin infections, these antibodies are produced against those streptococci and certain cells in the body that resemble the portion or a part of the bacterial cell also. And these antibodies combined with the cells against which they are formed and lumpy deposits of immunoglobulin and also the complement accumulate. And they accumulate along the glomerular basement membrane. It has been seen that the types of streptococci that causes skin infections can lead to this type of autoimmune disease, which is known as acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, because it occurs after that infection by beta-hemolytic streptococci. So these complexes again activate the complement, and inflammation of the glomerular basement membrane occurs, and it causes damage to the kidneys. So then IgA nephropathy is another clinical condition in which Deposits of immunoglobulin A occur on the glomeruli of the renal system, and it is very common immune complex glomerulonephritis, but the cause is unknown, that how this IgA develops and then it gets deposited on the glomeruli. Sensitivity, in which chronic inflammatory autoimmune disease occurs in young females, and these antigen